So let's walk this through, not emotionally, not with slogans, but with the one thing that does not lie: trajectory. We are told Charlie Kirk was shot by a rooftop sniper from 200 yards out, center stage, from the top of the Lucy Center. The government says it, the media echoes it, and within hours, the narrative is set in stone. The suspect is Tyler Robinson. The weapon is a Mauser-style bolt-action rifle. The motive is political. The story is complete. But they forgot something. Something small, but fatal to the entire foundation. They forgot to check the angle. The video, when slowed to its raw frames, shows not an entry wound at the front, but a rupture behind the right ear. The exit is lower, mid-left neck. That is not a straight-on path. That is not a shot from stage center. That is a wound channel that travels diagonally, right to left, back to front, high to low. That's geometry. That's physics. That's truth. So right away, the entire premise of the official narrative collapses. A bullet traveling from 200 yards across a courtyard, from a rooftop directly in front of the speaker, cannot enter from behind and above the right ear. It cannot exit through the left side of the neck. You don't have to be a forensic analyst to see that. You only need a line and 2 points. But it gets worse. Because if the shot didn't come from center stage, then the suspect placed at center stage cannot be the shooter. And now you start to see why this matters. Because what was sold to the public wasn't an investigation. It was a story already waiting for a body, and now the body isn't cooperating. They say Robinson was on the roof. True, there is video of him there. He climbs, he moves, he flees. But in all that footage, not one frame shows him with a rifle. Not slung across his back. Not carried in his hands. Not laid on the ground. Nothing. A 4-foot bolt-action rifle doesn't hide in your sock. And yet there he is, ascending, standing, and escaping without a visible weapon. We're told the rifle was found later in the woods far from the building. We're told his palm print was on the bolt. We're told this proves the link. But proof doesn't begin after the fact. It begins in the moment. And in the moment, there is no gun. Think about that. A suspect with no visible rifle. A shooting angle that contradicts his location. A wound path that disproves the direction. And a weapon found nowhere near him, at a time when he is already gone. If that's evidence, then we've redefined the term. But the real problem isn't the absence of proof. It's the presence of contradiction. The physical body of Charlie Kirk. Not the politics, not the assumptions, not the news cycle. The body itself tells a different story. The pressure wave begins before the fall. That's visible.
I'll talk to you in about 15
The shock
minutes.
cavity forms from right to left. That's measurable. The camera doesn't capture the bullet. It captures the echo. And that echo moves across the frame, leftward, downward, exactly opposite the official claim. This is not speculation. This is biomechanics. High-speed trauma from high-velocity projectiles behaves in patterns, and those patterns don't care what story you're trying to tell. So let's ask the question no one in the press will ask. If the shooter wasn't in front of him, where was the shooter? If the suspect didn't have a gun, who did? And if the trajectory points behind and left, why is all attention focused 200 yards in the opposite direction? Because once you ask that, the rest of the story begins to rot. The palm print, just one, on the bolt handle, not the trigger, not mixed with residue, no GSR confirmed, no blood, no link to the shot, only to the weapon. A weapon that we never see him carry, never see him fire, never see him retrieve. But the public doesn't hear this. What they hear is the repetition: lone gunman, campus sniper, political motive. It plays well, it sounds complete, it satisfies the script, and every minute that passes without challenge makes the false version more real. That's how the illusion is built. And that's why it has to be dismantled, not emotionally, but mechanically, piece by piece, shot by shot, frame by frame. And when you do that, when you actually walk through each layer, test each claim against the evidence, and cut away what doesn't match, you don't just find doubt, you find impossibility. The story they've sold is not just wrong, it's physically impossible. And now we have to decide what to do with that. Because the media won't touch it. The investigators already moved on. And the man at the center of this, the one who could have answered for himself, is gone. What's left is the evidence, and the evidence doesn't lie. The moment you realize the evidence doesn't lie, you have to ask why so many people are working so hard to talk over it. Because the instant this became political, the instant names and motives were assigned before the first forensic report was even drafted, the investigation lost its anchor. From that point on, it wasn't about where the bullet came from. It was about where they wanted it to come from. And to sell that story, every contradiction had to be buried. The timeline had to be compressed. The angles had to be ignored. The wound had to be mislabeled. What the public was shown over and over again was not a reconstruction of what happened. It was a repackaging. The body collapses on camera, and the reaction is real. But the conclusion drawn from it, that was handed down before the body hit the ground. They say he was struck from the front, but anyone who has watched the footage with even basic anatomical literacy knows that's false. They say the suspect was armed, but no one had seen him with a weapon. They say the motive was political, but they won't discuss what part of the evidence proves that. Instead, they rely on a kind of narrative inertia, the assumption that because someone was in the area, because they looked suspicious, because a weapon was found later, then all other facts must be bent to make those details align. That's not investigation. That's confirmation bias. That's how wrongful convictions happen. That's how public tragedies get converted into political leverage. But let's keep going. Let's talk about the bullet. A .30-06 round is not a subtle thing. It is loud, concussive, and fast. It produces muzzle flash, recoil, and smoke. At the range described, over 200 yards, there would have been a delay between the visual impact and the sound of the shot reaching the crowd. That delay, if you match it to the video, doesn't show up. The audio and the visual collapse together, meaning either the shot was much closer or the sound was added, looped, or otherwise manipulated. Either way, it's another inconsistency, another thread unraveling. Then there's the claim of sniper-level precision. They want you to believe a long bolt-action rifle was carried undetected, positioned without alerting anyone, aimed across a crowded quad, and fired with perfect accuracy at a moving target, all by someone with no known sniper training, no confirmed firing position, and no direct sightline corroborated by video. That's not just unlikely. That's fantasy. Meanwhile, what do we see? A collapse that happens a fraction of a second after a twitch. Not the kind of twitch that comes from being startled, but the kind that comes from sudden neurological shutdown. That's what a brainstem shot does. And that's what we see here. A drop, not a stumble. A body that gives way all at once. That's not from panic, that's from trauma. And that trauma came from the side. So why lie about it? Why construct a story that doesn't match the angles, doesn't match the timing, doesn't match the visuals? Because the alternative opens doors they don't want to walk through. If the shot didn't come from the front, then who was behind him? If the suspect didn't fire the rifle, then who did? If the wound doesn't match the narrative, then what does it match? And suddenly, we're not talking about one shooter anymore. Suddenly, we're not talking about a clean motive with a single name. Suddenly, we're talking about a possibility that someone else, someone with proximity, someone with access, stood where no camera was pointed. And once that thought is allowed in, the rest of the story changes shape. You start to look at the timing differently. You start to look at the silence differently. You start to realize how fast the coverage came out, how quickly the narrative was aligned across every network, every official channel, every podium. You start to notice what wasn't said, what wasn't released. No autopsy report, publicly confirmed. No ballistic matching presented. No photo of the rifle at the time of recovery. No images of the suspect with any weapon. Just statements, just conclusions. And those conclusions came before any analysis could challenge them. And this is where we circle back to what matters. Truth is not decided by repetition. It's decided by correspondence with reality. And here, reality is inconvenient. The wounds are wrong. The angle is wrong. The suspect is wrong. The shot is wrong. But the people telling the story, they're very, very confident. And when people get that confident about a version of events that doesn't line up with the evidence, you're not dealing with journalism. You're dealing with a script. And once you know it's a script, you stop listening for the next answer and you start looking for the first lie. And the first lie, the one that all the others are built on, is the location of the shooter. Everything hinges on it. The entire structure of guilt, motive, weapon recovery, it all leans on that one claim, that the shot came from 200 yards in front of the stage. But once that falls, everything else follows. They had to place the shooter there because it creates distance. Distance gives them the illusion of separation. It makes it harder to question proximity. It shields the event from intimacy. But the body doesn't obey narrative. It obeys force. The trajectory of the bullet, the angle of entry, the direction of tissue rupture, all of it says no. The shooter was not in front. He was not far away. He was closer. He was behind. So now the question isn't just who had a rifle. It's who had access, who was near enough to be behind and left of center at the moment of impact, who was inside the blind spot, not of the camera, but of the story itself. That's where this leads. That's the path they don't want to follow. Because if the shooter wasn't on the roof, then someone else was. And that someone wasn't in the frame they gave us. Let's examine the timeline. From the moment Charlie Kirk begins answering the student's question to the moment he collapses, it's under 10 seconds. In that time, his body language shows no awareness of an imminent threat. No flinch. No warning. That's not how people behave when a weapon is raised from a known location. And if it had come from the roof, from across the way, there would have been time. Sound, motion, reflection, something would have given it away. But there was nothing. What followed was not panic. It was confusion. That's important. When people hear a loud crack from a known source, they react with direction. They run away from it. But when the sound and the result don't align, when a man drops and no one knows why, that's confusion. That's not consistent with a sniper shot. That's consistent with a suppressed discharge or a closer range shot masked by ambient noise. And that's exactly what we see. Not in the camera, but in the crowd. A half-second pause before anyone realizes what's happening. And by then, it's done. Now ask yourself, what kind of shot creates that effect? Not a high-powered rifle echoing off concrete. Not a muzzle blast from an open rooftop. No, that kind of sound travels, it reverberates, it shocks. But here, we get something else. The sound is brief, contained, like a cap popping, not a rifle roaring. So again, the evidence walks away from the narrative. It walks towards something quieter, something closer. And yet the conversation has already been shaped so that any deviation from the official version is labeled conspiracy. That word conspiracy has become a tool, as not for protecting truth, but for insulating lies. Say it enough times, and no one asks follow-up questions. But real investigation doesn't stop at the word conspiracy. It begins at the moment the story breaks under scrutiny. And here, it's broken. The weapon was never seen. The suspect was never armed. The trajectory contradicts the scene. The audio contradicts the range. The timeline contradicts the narrative. That's not a crack in the story. That's a collapse. So what's left? A rifle in the woods, a name in the headlines, and a sequence of events that falls apart the moment you match them against the footage. And that brings us to the motive. Because when you have no direct evidence, you have to sell the story on intent. That's why they told you it was political. That's why they rushed to connect the act to ideology. Not with a manifesto, not with a confession, but with a vague history, a few online comments, maybe a sticker or two, and suddenly it's a campaign. They use motive to fill the gaps that evidence can't reach. But motive without action is meaningless. People think all kinds of things. They post all kinds of things. That doesn't pull a trigger. That doesn't move a bullet. And when motive becomes the first thing they tell you, rather than the last thing confirmed, you know they're building backward. They needed a name, they needed a reason, they needed a face. And the rest? The wounds, the path, the weapon, the timing, all of that came second. And when facts come second, what you're watching isn't justice, it's theater. But theater doesn't last. Eventually, the lights go up, the script ends, the curtain falls, and the truth, that thing buried under misdirection and repetition, begins to show through. You can't hide an angle forever. You can't erase a wound's geometry. And you can't bury the first fault deep enough that someone determined won't dig it up. The real shot wasn't just the one that struck the body. It was the one that rewrote the story. And that story is now unraveling, one frame at a time. And this is where we cross the final threshold. the point where the evidence no longer fits inside the framework they built and something else has to be introduced. Not because it's convenient, but because it's the only explanation that remains standing. We've already eliminated the rooftop theory. The angle's wrong. The suspect's placement is wrong. The trajectory doesn't lie, and what it tells us is undeniable. The shot came from above and behind at a sharper angle than any nearby building could provide. We've walked that geometry forward and backward. We've ruled out the center stage narrative. We've dismantled the suspect's physical impossibility. What's left is not speculation, it's necessity. Because when the body is telling you the shot came from a much steeper angle than any structure could offer, and when you realize that the left rear quadrant has no towers, no hills, no balconies, no scaffold, you have to look up. Not figuratively, literally. And when you look up, it's not hard to find what fits. There was a drone in the area. That's not theory. That's confirmed visually by multiple amateur recordings from the event. Something hovered, something moved, and it did so without drawing alarm. Why? Because in America, drones are toys. They're camera gear. They're background noise. We don't flinch. We don't question. We assume it's just another filmmaker belly, another live streamer, another college kid capturing B-roll. But at the same time, and this has gone almost completely ignored, radar logs show that a small private aircraft passed directly over Utah Valley University, not just in the vicinity, not miles off, directly overhead. And it did so without an active transponder. That's not normal. That's not legal. And it's not a glitch. You don't forget to turn on your transponder flying through Class D airspace. You turn it off when you don't want to be seen. Now, radar did pick up the aircraft, not because it was cooperating, but because civilian and military radar still sweep passively. What it didn't do was identify the aircraft. And at the same time, no flight plan was filed. No tail number was reported. No pilot came forward. It was there, then it wasn't. That alone should have triggered immediate federal scrutiny. It didn't. Why? Because everyone was already looking at the roof, and this is what professionals call directional bias. When investigators become fixated on a location, a suspect, or a theory, every other variable gets downgraded. In this case, downgraded to 0. But think about what kind of shot this was. It was perfect. It was instantaneous. It was downward, sharp, with entry at the rear right of the skull, and an exit clean through the left neck. That's not a panic shot. That's not a shaky hand. That's surgical. That's computed. That's assisted. And there's one tool that exists today, right now, capable of making that shot: a stabilized, high-altitude, drone-mounted precision rifle platform. Does it sound futuristic? It's not. These systems exist. They're not in the shadows. They're on YouTube. Demonstrations are public. You can buy a basic platform for $15,000 to $20,000. With the right rig, a rangefinder, and off-the-shelf AI object tracking, you can tag a moving human target and hit it with military-level accuracy from 200 to 300 feet in the air. And no one on the ground would ever know it happened until the sound reaches them, if it ever does. At that altitude, especially on a noisy campus quad with cheering, music, background audio, you're not going to hear a quiet, single suppressed shot. You might not even see the drone. And if you do, you won't assume it's a threat. That's the genius of it. It's not hiding in the shadows, it's hiding in plain sight. This is not James Bond. This is Amazon-level accessibility. Build a simple carbon fiber frame, mount a motorized cradle, use servo recoil compensation, connect it to a first-person camera feed in a ballistic computer. You're done. Add transport via van or SUV. Add signal routing through a VPN or portable uplink. Done. Fully mobile, disposable, and accurate to a quarter-inch at range. Total cost? 20 to 25 grand. That's within reach of a college grant, a group of activists, a political cell, a black market contractor, or anyone with a GoFundMe and a cause. And yet no part of the official narrative is even willing to discuss the possibility. Why? Because the idea of a remote, untraceable, autonomous shooter throws the entire system into chaos. No motive to pin, no location to secure, no fingerprints, no rooftop, no timeline, just a hole in the sky and a body on the ground. It's an uncomfortable truth, and that's exactly why it's the only one that makes sense. Drones aren't rare anymore. They aren't suspicious. And in the rest of the world, when people see them in the sky, they duck. In war zones, they run. In some parts of Europe, airspace control flags them immediately. But here, we let them fly over stadiums, over military bases, over city halls. We think it's cool. We think it's content. That cultural blindness is the cover. It allows a weapon to appear unarmed. It allows a threat to masquerade as a toy. And it allows a story to take hold. A story that cannot be true if the shooter wasn't on the ground. So let's put this all together. A trajectory that demands a steeper angle than any building can offer. A shot that arrived too fast, too precise, too vertical to be humanly fired from 200 yards across. A suspect with no weapon, no visual link, and no confirmed position at the time of discharge. A rifle found far away, unconnected. A body that says the bullet came from above and behind, and a piece of sky directly above that, where an unidentified drone and a transponderless aircraft were both present. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see what this is. You just have to stop pretending the truth is off limits. You have to stop thinking precision only belongs to governments. It doesn't. It belongs to whoever can afford a drone, a circuit board, and a trigger. You have to stop thinking shooters only stand on rooftops. Some of them hover. And while everyone looked at the suspect on the ground, the real weapon may have flown away. That's the part they can't control. Because once you understand that the shot didn't come from the ground, then every headline, every press conference, every public assurance becomes irrelevant. Because now you're not just asking who pulled the trigger, you're asking who programmed the machine, who funded the operation, who gave access to the airspace, who knew the drone was coming, and why no one, not the FBI, not local law enforcement, not the Department of Homeland Security, has even addressed the one variable that renders their entire case obsolete: altitude. There is no structure on campus that aligns with the vertical angle recorded in the wound track. There is no tower or crane in that quadrant. The exit point proves elevation, the downward pressure proves height, and the bullet's path leaves no room for a rooftop rifle 200 yards away. That means the shooter wasn't standing, the shooter wasn't hiding, the shooter wasn't breathing, the shooter was flying. And yet, even now, the narrative clings to the rooftops. Not because that's where the evidence leads, but because that's where the script demands the story to end. They need it to be a lone shooter. They need a visible villain. They need a body in custody, a weapon on a table, a name that fills the screen. Because what they can't afford, what the system is not designed to accommodate, is the idea that for $25,000, anyone with technical know-how and malice could execute a political figure with military precision and vanish without a trace. That possibility isn't just uncomfortable, it's system-breaking. It challenges the assumption that we're safe because we can see the threat. It challenges the belief that only powerful governments have access to this kind of lethality. It challenges the illusion that surveillance equals security, because drones don't blink, they don't flinch, they don't panic, they don't miss, and when programmed correctly, they don't leave evidence behind. A drone doesn't have to exfiltrate, it just ascends, and if it's dumped, it leaves behind nothing but carbon and firmware. No motive, no witness, no human flaw. It doesn't need an escape route. It only needs 10 minutes of silence and a sky no one thinks to question. That's what we saw. Not a clean assassination, not a political grudge, but a precision event executed from a height that no one was looking at because they had already been told where to look. And that's the final deception. They gave us a story with a roof so we wouldn't look at the sky. They gave us a suspect with a past so we wouldn't ask about the technology. They gave us a motive so we wouldn't examine the method. And they gave us a conclusion so they wouldn't have to defend the investigation. But the body doesn't lie. The wound doesn't lie. The bullet's path doesn't lie. The direction of force is unambiguous. And what it tells us is devastating. The weapon that killed Charlie Kirk was not shoulder fired. It was not held. It was not seen. It was delivered from above with computing power and control and silence. That's the world we live in now. A world where a drone can hover over a crowd and no one blinks. Where a rifle can fire from a sky no one guards. Where the murder of a public figure can happen in full view. And the story that follows can be so precisely constructed, so rapidly deployed, that the truth never even gets a chance to speak. But the truth doesn't go away. It waits. It sits inside the wound, inside the frames, inside the silence. It waits for someone to ask the one question that still matters. Not who they told us did it, but where the shot came from. And once you ask that, not emotionally, not theatrically, but surgically, the rest becomes obvious. The rifle didn't come from a rooftop. The shooter didn't walk across campus. The bullet didn't travel horizontally. It fell, fast and clean, from the sky. And the moment you accept that, the story doesn't just change, it ends. Because now the first fault is exposed, and there's no narrative strong enough to bury it again. If this version of events got out there, spread widely, documented carefully, made impossible to ignore, it could expose something very dirty in how mainstream media and government narratives operate. It could shatter the false flagging stories they've built. It might force accountability. Here's how and why. They think they control the story. They issue the roof sniper theory, the rifle, the suspect, the distance, the angle. They repeat it on every network. People accept it because it sounds plausible, because we want closure, because they tell us they have the evidence. But what we're showing is something else, that every pillar of that narrative rests on presumption, not proof. The wound path mismatches the claimed position. The suspect is never seen with the weapon. The recovered rifle is disconnected. The physical geography doesn't support the claim, not reliably. And worse, we now have reason to believe the shot may have come from a vehicle many don't even consider, a drone or untracked plane overhead. If people were to take this narrative seriously, if the wound geometry, the video frame analysis, trajectory angles, the possibility of unmanned aerial weaponry were all laid bare, then the mainstream story begins to unravel right in front of them. Media outlets that push the roof sniper version would be shown as having relied on assumptions, not evidence. Government agencies that declared certainty might be seen as having jumped too fast or hidden contradictory details. They might have to explain why radar logs showing transponder-off aircraft, drone sightings, unaccounted altitude, etc. were omitted or dismissed. Public trust in media and government depends on believing they have the evidence, they did their work, they are telling us the truth. But when the evidence contradicts the story so clearly, that trust fractures. Once fractured, false narratives, especially false flag ones, lose their power. And there is a strong possibility this exposure could go so far that it pushes beyond social media into legal scrutiny. If the wound path, operator logs, drone data, radar tracks are all obtainable, then questions of criminal neglect, cover-ups, misreporting become real. People in official roles who claimed certainty might be forced to testify. Press organizations that repeated unverified claims might be held to account. For the very government dedicated to hiding clandestine activity, and for the mainstream media that sells it to the public, this is a nightmare. Because their mechanism depends on controlled narrative. Select what is shown, frame the rest, suppress what undermines. Once what undermines is revealed, angle, exit wound, lack of visible rifle, the possibility of aerial shooter, then the mechanism is exposed, and the control slips. If this version becomes the dominant one, if it's documented, shared, verified, then it doesn't just correct one story, it sets precedent. It forces media to demand better evidence before declaring conclusions. It forces government to release the drone, radar, aircraft flight logs. It forces forensics to be transparent. It forces the culture of assumption to yield to the culture of proof. And that could break false flag stories before they're even fully formed, because people would know. Don't trust the first narrative. Inspect the angles. Look for what isn't shown. Demand the weapon in view. Demand exit wounds. Don't accept press releases as proof. When enough people see this, the accepted lie loses its power. This could be the moment that wakes up the system. If done right with the documentation, the visuals, the comparisons, it could shatter the dark mechanism by which stories are sold. False narratives become accepted, and hidden actions go unchallenged. Because truth has a dimension they can't suppress. Physical space, angle, exit, clarity. And once the truth aligns with what you can see, what you can measure, what you can verify, that's when the story doesn't just change, it becomes impossible to ignore.